Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Builder. Blake Morrison learned early that respect was earned through sweat and blood, not birthright. Growing up in Detroit's crumbling neighborhoods, he watched his father work 3 jobs just to keep their lights on. When Blake was 16, a kitchen accident took his father's life, leaving him to care for his diabetic mother alone. At 18, Blake started washing dishes at Kozlov's Corner, a struggling Polish diner in Hamtramck. Vincent Kozlov, a weathered immigrant with calloused hands and broken English, saw something in the young man's relentless work ethic. While other employees called in sick or showed up late, Blake arrived early and stayed late, learning every aspect of the business. "You have fire in belly," Vincent told him one winter evening as they closed together. "Like me when I come to America with nothing." Blake's fire burned brighter when he met Amanda Kozlov, Vincent's daughter. She was studying business at Wayne State, beautiful in that untouchable way that made men stupid. But Blake wasn't just any man. He courted her with the same methodical intensity he applied to everything else, proving himself worthy not just of her attention, but of her father's respect. Their wedding 3 years later was Vincent's proudest moment. "Now you are true son," he declared, embracing Blake with tears in his eyes. "Together we build empire." And build they did. Blake convinced Vincent to expand beyond the single diner, securing loans and finding prime locations while Amanda managed the books. Blake's vision transformed Kozlov's Corner into Kozlov's Kitchen, then into a chain spanning 3 states. He worked 18-hour days, missing family gatherings and anniversaries, pouring every ounce of his being into creating something lasting. By their 10th anniversary, they owned 47 restaurants and employed over 800 people. Blake had turned Vincent's struggling diner into a $20 million empire. Amanda seemed happy, their marriage stable if not passionate. Vincent treated Blake like the son he'd never had, until Tommy came home. Tommy Kozlov was Vincent's son from his first marriage in Poland, abandoned when Vincent fled to America after his wife's death. For 30 years, Tommy had been a ghost, a painful memory Vincent rarely mentioned. Then, at 42, Tommy appeared at their door with his own family and a sob story about starting over in America. Blake welcomed him warmly, offering Tommy a management position and helping him find housing. It seemed like divine providence. Vincent finally reunited with his blood son, the family complete at last. He should have seen the poison spreading. Chapter 2. The Crack in the Foundation. Tommy Kozlov possessed his father's charm, but lacked his work ethic. While Blake continued grinding 16-hour days, Tommy floated through the restaurants with an air of entitlement, treating employees like servants and making promises he couldn't keep. Blake noticed the small things first: inventory discrepancies, customer complaints about Tommy's attitude, staff turnover at locations Tommy frequented. "Your brother needs time to adjust," Blake told Amanda one evening as they reviewed quarterly reports. "The restaurant business is different here." Amanda barely looked up from her laptop. "He's not my brother, Blake. He's Vincent's son." The distinction should have warned him, but Blake was too focused on maintaining the empire he'd built. He implemented new protocols, assigned Tommy to less critical positions, and tried to shield Vincent from the growing problems. Vincent was 70 now, his health declining, and Blake wanted to preserve the old man's joy at having his son back. Meanwhile, Blake began noticing changes in Amanda. She stayed late at the office more frequently, took weekend trips to visit suppliers, and seemed distant during their rare intimate moments. When Blake suggested they finally start the family they'd been planning, she deflected with talk about expanding the business further. "We're at a critical juncture," she said. "This isn't the time for distractions." Blake threw himself deeper into work, telling himself that success would solve their problems. He negotiated deals for 12 new locations, implemented new technology systems, and increased their profit margins by 18%. The business magazines called him a visionary, an immigrant's son who'd achieved the American dream. But success couldn't fix what was rotting at the core. The first real crack appeared during the annual company retreat in Orlando. Blake caught Tommy alone with Diane Walsh, their head of marketing, his hands wandering where they shouldn't. When Blake confronted him, Tommy's response was telling. "What are you going to do, tell Daddy?" Tommy sneered. "You forget, Blake, I'm family. You're just the help." Blake grabbed Tommy by the throat and slammed him against the hotel wall. "I built this company with my bare hands. Show some respect." Tommy just smiled, even as Blake's grip tightened. Build all you want, brother-in-law. Blood trumps sweat every time. That night, Blake lay awake as Amanda slept beside him, Tommy's words echoing in his mind. He thought about the contracts he'd signed 15 years ago, the trust he'd placed in Vincent's promises, the foundation he'd built his life upon. For the first time, he wondered if he'd been building his castle on sand. Chapter 3. The Betrayal Unveiled. The end began on a Tuesday morning in March. Blake arrived at the headquarters early, as always, to find Vincent waiting in the conference room with Tommy, Amanda, and their attorney, Gerald Brennan. The formal setup immediately put Blake on alert. "Sit down, Blake," Vincent said, his voice lacking its usual warmth. "We need to discuss the future of the company." Blake remained standing. "What's there to discuss? We're opening 4 new locations this quarter, and the Phoenix expansion is ahead of schedule." "That's exactly the problem," Tommy interjected. "You're expanding too fast, taking too many risks. The company needs stable leadership, not a cowboy mentality." Blake's jaw tightened. "Cowboy mentality? I've tripled our revenue in 5 years." "Vincent," Gerald cleared his throat. "Perhaps you should explain the restructuring." Vincent couldn't meet Blake's eyes. "Tommy has been studying the business, learning our operations. He has fresh ideas, modern perspective. He should be running day-to-day operations now." "And what does that make me?" Blake asked quietly. "You'll oversee kitchen operations," Amanda said, her voice coldly professional. "Food quality, menu development. You're excellent at that." The room fell silent. Blake stared at his wife, the woman he'd built an empire to provide for, as she calmly relegated him to a glorified chef position. 15 years of 18-hour days, missed holidays, sacrificed dreams, all reduced to kitchen operations. "I spent 15 years building this company," Blake said, his voice deadly calm. "I turned a failing diner into a multi-million-dollar empire. And we're grateful," Tommy said with a patronizing smile. "But times change. The company needs blood leadership, not hired hands." Blake's hands clenched into fists. "Hired hands. Blake," Vincent finally spoke, "Tommy is my son. My real son. Family comes first." That evening, Blake sat in his truck outside Amanda's supposed supplier meeting, watching through the restaurant window as she fed cake to Derek Stone, their biggest competitor. Derek Stone, who'd been trying to buy them out for 3 years. Derek Stone, who was now running his hands through Amanda's hair as she laughed at something he whispered. Blake took photos with his phone, each shot feeling like a nail in a coffin. When Derek kissed his wife, Blake didn't feel anger or heartbreak. He felt clarity. The next morning, Blake walked into Vincent's office where the old man sat with Tommy, both smiling as they reviewed expansion plans. Blake's expansion plans, being discussed as if he didn't exist. "Ready to train Tommy how to run our restaurants?" Vincent asked with that same patronizing smile from the day before. Blake set his coffee down carefully. "No, I'm here to collect the keys to my restaurants." Vincent's smile vanished immediately. "What are you talking about?" Blake pulled out a folder thick with documents. 15 years ago, when you convinced me to invest my father's life insurance money into this business, we signed partnership agreements. Agreements that give me 51% ownership of every location opened after the original diner." The color drained from Vincent's face. "Those papers, you said those were just formalities." "I said what you needed to hear." Blake's voice was ice. "Did you really think I'd work this hard without protecting myself? I've been documenting every decision, every expansion, every dollar invested. I own 39 of your 47 restaurants." Tommy lurched to his feet. "You can't do this." Blake turned to him slowly. "I built this empire while you were drinking yourself stupid in Poland. These restaurants exist because of my sweat, my vision, my sacrifice. You want to talk about blood? I've bled for this company every day for 15 years." He turned back to Vincent, who looked like he'd aged a decade in minutes. "You have 48 hours to decide. Either I remain CEO with full operational control, or I execute my ownership rights and take what's mine. Your choice." As Blake walked toward the door, Tommy grabbed his arm. "You ungrateful piece of—" Blake's backhand sent Tommy crashing into the desk, blood streaming from his nose. "Don't ever touch me again." He paused at the door, looking back at Vincent one last time. "I loved you like a father. I would have given you everything. But you chose blood over loyalty, genetics over character. Now you'll learn the difference between a son and a builder." The war had begun. Chapter 4. The Architect of Ruin. Blake didn't go home that night. Instead, he drove to his private office, a space Vincent and Tommy didn't even know existed, located 3 blocks from headquarters in an unremarkable building. For 2 years, he'd been preparing for this possibility, though he'd hoped it would never come. The office contained copies of every contract, financial record, and legal document related to the business. More importantly, it contained something Vincent and Tommy couldn't imagine: leverage. Blake's phone buzzed with 17 missed calls from Amanda. He ignored them and focused on the wall of information he'd spent years accumulating. Photos, documents, recorded conversations, insurance against the very betrayal he was now experiencing. At 3 a.m., his phone finally rang with a call he answered. Marcus Rivera, came the voice of Blake's old friend from Detroit. Marcus now ran a private investigation firm, specializing in corporate espionage and personal security. I need everything, Marcus. Full background on Tommy Kozlov, current financials on Derek Stone, and surveillance on Amanda starting tomorrow. This sounds personal. It's business now. Blake's voice was granite. How quickly can you move? 48 hours for deep background. Ongoing surveillance starts immediately. What's the budget? Unlimited. The next morning, Blake appeared at headquarters as if nothing had happened. He worked his usual schedule, attended meetings, and maintained his professional demeanor while Tommy nursed his broken nose and Vincent avoided eye contact. But underneath the surface, Blake was orchestrating something beautiful and terrible. His first move was elegant in its simplicity. Blake contacted every major supplier, contractor, and business partner with whom they'd worked over the past decade. As the public face of the company's expansion, Blake had cultivated these relationships personally. Now he called in favors. Jim, it's Blake Morrison. I need you to know there might be some confusion about payment authorization going forward. Until further notice, any orders or changes need my personal approval. 15 years of relationships paid dividends in a single morning. By noon, Tommy's attempts to order new equipment for 3 locations had been politely declined pending authorization clarification. Amanda called as Blake was leaving for lunch. What the hell are you doing? My job, Blake replied calmly. Making sure the company runs smoothly during this transition period. Vincent wants to see you immediately. I'm busy. Schedule an appointment. That afternoon, Marcus delivered the preliminary report on Tommy Kozlov. Blake read it twice, a slow smile spreading across his face. Tommy hadn't just been a drunk in Poland. He'd been a con artist, running elaborate schemes targeting American tourists. More interesting, he'd fled Poland under suspicious circumstances involving missing money from a construction project. But the real gold mine was Derek Stone's file. Derek's restaurant empire was impressive on the surface, but Marcus had uncovered something beautiful. Derek was leveraged to his eyeballs, 3 months behind on several loan payments, and desperate for a major acquisition to avoid bankruptcy. Amanda's affair wasn't just betrayal, it was industrial espionage. Blake picked up his phone and dialed Derek's direct line. Derek Stone. Derek, it's Blake Morrison. I think we should talk. Silence stretched across the line. About what? About the deal you've been negotiating with my wife. I assume you discussed more than just her body. Derek's breathing became audible. I don't know what you're talking about. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., the Marriott downtown. Come alone, or I'll destroy you by noon. Blake hung up. That evening, Blake finally went home. Amanda was waiting in the kitchen, still in her business attire, her face a mask of controlled fury. You can't just hold the company hostage, she began. Blake poured himself a scotch and sat across from her. Hostage? I'm protecting my investment. Our investment. Unless you've forgotten that we built this together. Vincent raised you from nothing. How can you repay him like this? Blake studied her face, noting the slight tremor in her voice, the way she couldn't quite meet his eyes. Tell me about Derek Stone. Amanda's composure cracked for just a moment. What about him? How long have you been feeding him our expansion plans? You're paranoid. Blake slid a photo across the table. Amanda feeding Derek cake, his hands in her hair, the kiss that ended Blake's marriage. She stared at the image, her face cycling through denial, anger, and finally, defiance. I won't apologize for finding someone who appreciates me. Blake nodded slowly. Good. I prefer honesty to lies. Blake, we can work this out. The company doesn't have to be destroyed over. Over what? Your affair? Vincent's betrayal? Tommy's incompetence. Blake finished his scotch. You're right. The company doesn't have to be destroyed. But some things do. He stood to leave, then paused. Pack a bag, Amanda. After tomorrow, this won't be your home anymore. As Blake walked upstairs, Amanda called after him. You can't just throw me out. I have rights. Blake's laughter echoed through the house. Rights? Let's see what rights you have when I'm done. Chapter 5. The Meeting. The Marriott's top-floor restaurant was nearly empty at 10 a.m., making Derek Stone easy to spot. He sat alone at a corner table, nervously checking his phone every few seconds. Blake observed him for 5 minutes before approaching, noting the expensive suit that couldn't hide the man's obvious anxiety. Derek. Blake sat without offering his hand. Blake. Look, whatever you think you know. I know you're 3 months behind on your loan payments. I know your Phoenix locations are hemorrhaging money. I know you need a major acquisition to avoid bankruptcy by September. Blake signaled the waiter for coffee. I also know you've been screwing my wife for information about our expansion plans. Derek's face went white. That's not. We haven't discussed business. Blake slid a folder across the table. These are copies of our internal documents, Derek. Documents that somehow found their way to your desk before we made our expansion announcements. Funny coincidence. Derek opened the folder, his hands trembling slightly as he recognized his own handwriting in the margins of Blake's confidential reports. What do you want? Derek asked. I want you to understand your position. You're not just Amanda's lover. You're my unwitting business partner. Blake leaned back. Every move you've made in the past year has been based on information I allowed you to have. Allowed? Blake's smile was predatory. Did you really think I wouldn't notice my wife's sudden interest in supplier meetings? I've been feeding you selected information for 8 months, watching you position your restaurants exactly where I wanted you. Derek's face cycled through confusion, then understanding, then terror. You've been setting me up. I've been preparing for war. You just happen to be useful. Blake pulled out his phone and showed Derek a video. Amanda in Derek's office, copying files from his computer while Derek showered. She's been playing both sides, Derek. Feeding you our plans, feeding us yours. The question is, which side of this war do you want to be on when it ends? Derek stared at the video, his world crumbling. What kind of monster are you? The kind that builds empires. Blake put his phone away. Here's your choice. You can continue being Amanda's pawn, hoping she'll somehow save you from bankruptcy. Or you can work with me to salvage something from this mess. Work with you how? Blake leaned forward. I'm about to take control of the Kozlov chain. When I do, there will be opportunities for someone with your experience, someone who understands the cost of betrayal. Derek was quiet for a long moment. And if I refuse? Then by Friday, every bank in the state will know about your creative accounting practices. Your investors will receive detailed reports about your hidden losses. Your business partners will learn interesting facts about your personal life. Blake's voice remained conversational. I've spent 15 years learning how to destroy people who cross me, Derek. Don't test my resolve. Derek's coffee sat untouched, growing cold as he processed his options. What do you need from me? Complete documentation of every conversation you've had with Amanda about our business. Every document she's shared, every plan she's discussed. Everything. That would destroy her. Blake's laugh was bitter. She destroyed herself the moment she chose greed over loyalty. I'm just making sure everyone understands the cost. Derek nodded slowly. When do you need this? Tonight. Bring everything to this address at 8 p.m. Blake slid a card across the table. Come alone, and Derek? If you warn her, if you try to play games, I'll bury you so deep your grandchildren will still be paying your debts. As Blake stood to leave, Derek grabbed his wrist. How long have you known? Blake looked down at the man who'd been sleeping with his wife. I've known Amanda was unhappy for years. I've known she was stealing information for months. I've known you were desperate enough to betray your own principles for survival since our first meeting. He pulled his arm free. The only thing I didn't know was how satisfying it would be to watch you all realize how thoroughly you've been played. That afternoon, Blake received a call from Vincent requesting an emergency meeting. Blake arrived at headquarters to find Vincent, Tommy, Amanda, and their lawyer waiting in the conference room. The family that had cast him out was now huddled together, desperation written across their faces. Blake, Vincent began, we've reviewed the partnership agreements. Perhaps we can reach a compromise. Blake sat at the head of the table, in his conference room, in the building he'd paid for. I'm listening. Amanda spoke up. The company means everything to Vincent. Surely we can find a way to. The company means everything to me too, Blake interrupted. That's why I built it. That's why I protected it. That's why I'm not letting incompetent children destroy it. Tommy slammed his hand on the table. You ungrateful son of a bitch. We gave you everything. Blake's response was swift and vicious. He grabbed Tommy's hand and twisted until something cracked, driving the man to his knees. You gave me nothing. I earned everything. And if you ever speak to me like that again, I'll break more than your fingers. Vincent was on his feet, shaking. Blake, please. Tommy is still recovering from his injuries. Blake released Tommy's hand and straightened his suit. Then perhaps he should learn when to shut his mouth. He turned to Amanda, who was staring at him with something approaching fear. How's Derek handling the news about his financial situation? Amanda's face went pale. I don't know what you mean. Of course you don't. Blake smiled. Well, you'll have plenty of time to discuss it with him tonight. I assume you're planning another supplier meeting? The meeting ended with Blake's ultimatum unchanged. Full control or complete ownership. As he walked to his car, Blake's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Package delivered to Derek Stone as requested. He's very motivated to cooperate. Blake smiled as he drove away. The pieces were all in motion now. Tomorrow, the real game would begin. Chapter 6. The Perfect Storm. Derek Stone arrived at Blake's private office that evening carrying 2 banker's boxes and wearing the expression of a man attending his own funeral. Blake let him sweat in silence for several minutes before speaking. Show me what you brought. Derek opened the first box with trembling hands. Emails from Amanda dating back 8 months. Financial projections she shared. Meeting notes about your expansion plans. Photos of documents she photographed in your home office. Blake examined each piece methodically, his expression growing colder with every revelation. Amanda hadn't just betrayed their marriage. She'd systematically undermined everything he'd built, sharing trade secrets, financial data, and strategic plans with their biggest competitor. This email from last week, Blake held up a printout. She's offering to deliver your complete acquisition proposal for the Kozlov chain. Did you actually believe I didn't know about that? Derek shifted uncomfortably. She said you were focused on day-to-day operations, that you wouldn't notice. I notice everything, Derek, including the fact that your acquisition proposal is identical to the one I drafted 6 months ago. Blake opened his laptop and showed Derek a document. I wrote this proposal as a test, then left it where Amanda could find it. She photographed it and delivered it to you within 48 hours. Derek stared at the screen, understanding dawning on his face. You've been manipulating this entire situation. I've been protecting my interests while my wife and business partners plotted against me. Blake closed the laptop. The difference is, I'm better at it than they are. Blake's phone rang. Marcus Rivera's voice came through the speaker. Blake, I'm outside the Kozlov house. Amanda just left with 3 suitcases. She's driving toward Derek's address. Let her go, Blake replied. Is Vincent still inside? Sitting in his kitchen, drinking. Looks like he's been at it for a while. Blake checked his watch. Perfect timing. Derek, you're going to make a phone call. For the next hour, Blake orchestrated a symphony of destruction. Derek called Amanda, following Blake's script perfectly, revealing that Blake knew about their affair and their business arrangements. Amanda's panicked response was exactly what Blake anticipated. She immediately called Tommy, warning him that Blake had evidence of their plans. Tommy's reaction was even more predictable. Within minutes, he was at his father's house, demanding that Vincent find a way to void Blake's partnership agreements. Their argument, captured by Marcus's surveillance equipment, was spectacular in its stupidity. Papa, we have to fight this. Tommy shouted. He's stealing our company. Vincent's slurred response revealed the depth of his regret. Is not our company anymore, Tommy. Was never our company. Blake built everything. We just lived in his house and pretended it was ours. But Tommy wasn't finished. In his desperation, he made the call Blake had been waiting for, reaching out to Blake's former employees, attempting to recruit them for a competing venture. It was exactly the legal violation Blake needed. At midnight, Blake's lawyer, Patricia Montrose, delivered a comprehensive lawsuit to Vincent's door. The papers detailed breach of fiduciary duty, corporate espionage, attempted theft of trade secrets, and a dozen other charges that would tie the Kozlov family in legal knots for years. But Blake wasn't satisfied with legal victories alone. The next morning, Blake arrived at headquarters to find chaos. Half the staff hadn't shown up, suppliers were refusing to deliver orders, and their three biggest corporate clients had mysteriously canceled their contracts overnight. Tommy was in Blake's office, frantically making phone calls, sweat beading on his forehead. When he saw Blake, his face twisted with rage. "What did you do?" Tommy demanded. Blake sat behind his desk calmly. "I exercised my ownership rights. As of this morning, I'm restructuring operations to improve efficiency. You can't just fire half our staff." "I didn't fire anyone. I offered them better positions with Stonecrest Hospitality Group." Blake smiled. "Derek's company, actually. He's decided to partner with me instead of working against me." Tommy's face went white. "That's impossible. Derek was working with us." Derek was working for himself, just like Amanda. The difference is, Derek was smart enough to recognize a sinking ship when he saw one. Blake's phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at it and stood. "Vincent wants to see me. Why don't you clean out your desk while I'm gone?" "You can't just." "I can do whatever I want, Tommy. It's my company." Blake found Vincent in the restaurant where it all began, sitting alone at a corner table in the original Kozlov's corner. The old man looked like he'd aged a decade overnight, his hands shaking as he lifted his coffee cup. "You came," Vincent said without looking up. Blake sat across from him. "You asked me to. I want to apologize." "For what, specifically?" Vincent's eyes filled with tears. "For forgetting who you are. For forgetting what you did for us. For choosing blood over character." Blake said nothing. "Tommy is not good man," Vincent continued. "I see this now. He cares only for himself, not for family, not for business. I was old fool, wanting to believe my son could be something he is not." "And Amanda?" Vincent shook his head sadly. "Amanda? I think she never loved the struggle, only the success. When success came easy, she forgot the price we paid for it." Blake leaned back in his chair. "So what do you want from me, Vincent?" "I want to offer you everything. Full ownership, complete control. Keep Tommy away from business. Keep Amanda away from your life. I will work for you, if you let me. I will earn my place again." Blake considered this for a long moment. "And what about family loyalty? Blood being thicker than water?" Vincent met his eyes for the first time. "You were better son to me than my own blood. I forgot this. I will not forget again." Blake stood and extended his hand. "Then let's rebuild what we lost." As Vincent gripped his hand, tears streaming down his face, Blake felt something close to satisfaction. But the war wasn't over yet. Amanda and Tommy would fight back, and Blake would be ready for them. After all, he'd been preparing for this his entire life. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. Amanda Morrison, soon to be Amanda Kozlov again, sat in Derek Stone's downtown apartment, staring at the legal documents that would reshape her world. The divorce papers were brutal in their simplicity. Blake wanted nothing from her except her immediate departure from his life. No alimony, no division of assets, no negotiation. "He can't just throw you out with nothing," Derek said, pacing behind her. "You helped build that company." Amanda laughed bitterly. "Did I? Or did I just watch him build it while I managed the books?" She set the papers down. "Blake's not stupid, Derek. These contracts are airtight. I signed away my rights 15 years ago without realizing it." Derek's phone rang. He answered with obvious reluctance. "Blake." "Derek, I trust Amanda has shown you the divorce papers." "Listen, you bastard. I'll stop you right there." Blake's voice was ice. "You're in no position to make threats. In fact, you're about to receive some interesting news about your own situation." Derek's doorbell rang. Through the window, he could see two men in suits standing on his porch. "I'd answer that if I were you," Blake continued. "The FBI doesn't like to be kept waiting." Derek's face went white. Amanda grabbed his arm. "What's happening?" "Derek, meet Special Agent Morrison, no relation to me, despite the name. He has some questions about your business practices. Specifically, about the falsified loan applications you submitted to First National Bank last year." The doorbell rang again, more insistently. "That's impossible," Derek whispered. "Those documents are sealed." "Nothing is sealed when you know the right people." Blake's voice carried a hint of amusement. "You see, Derek, when you're desperate enough to commit bank fraud, you leave traces. And when you're stupid enough to cross me, those traces become evidence." Derek ended the call and opened the door. The FBI agents entered with warrants and briefcases, their faces professionally neutral. Amanda watched in horror as they began examining Derek's financial records, his computers, his files. Derek Stone, you're under arrest for bank fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit mail fraud, Agent Morrison announced. You have the right to remain silent. As Derek was handcuffed and led away, Amanda found herself alone in an apartment that would soon be seized as evidence. Her phone rang. Blake again. Enjoying the show? She answered. Just getting started. You should check your email. Amanda opened her laptop and found a message from her bank. Her personal accounts had been frozen pending investigation into irregular transactions. Her credit cards had been canceled. Her trust fund, managed by Blake since their marriage, had been transferred to a legal escrow account pending divorce proceedings. You can't just cut me off from everything. Actually, I can. You see, Amanda, when you marry someone, you tend to give them power of attorney over your financial affairs, especially when that someone has been managing your money for 15 years. Amanda scrolled through email after email, cancellation notices, legal summons, debt collections for credit cards she'd never seen before. What did you do? I liquidated your actual net worth. Turns out, without the company assets you were never technically entitled to, you're worth about $37,000. Oh, and Derek took out several large loans using your signature as collateral. I assume you remember signing those papers? You thought they were expansion contracts. Amanda's world was collapsing around her. Blake, please. We can work this out. The affair, it was a mistake. I never meant for it to go this far. But it did go this far. You chose greed over loyalty, Amanda. You chose to destroy what we built together. Now you get to live with the consequences. The line went dead. Amanda sat in Derek's apartment, surrounded by evidence bags and FBI tape, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the dawning realization that Blake Morrison had been 3 steps ahead of her from the very beginning. Meanwhile, across town, Tommy Kozlov was having his own reckoning. Blake had been systematic in his destruction, using Tommy's criminal background from Poland to have his work visa revoked and his asylum application rejected. Tommy had 48 hours to leave the country or face deportation proceedings. Papa, you have to stop him. Tommy pleaded as Vincent packed his belongings. I am your son. Vincent looked at his son with mixture of sadness and disgust. You are not my son. You are a stranger who shares my blood. Blake Morrison is my son. He earned that title through 15 years of loyalty and sacrifice. I can change. I can learn the business properly. It's too late, Tommy. You showed your character when you had chance to prove yourself. Blake showed his character when he had chance to destroy us completely and chose mercy instead. Vincent handed Tommy an envelope. Blake, give me this for you. Plane ticket to Warsaw, $5,000, and promise that if you stay away from America, he will not pursue criminal charges for the money you stole from the Phoenix location. Tommy's face went white. How did he know about Phoenix? Vincent shook his head. Blake knows everything, Tommy. He always knows everything. Is why he builds empires while men like you just tear them down. That evening, Blake stood in the empty headquarters building, looking out at the city lights. The war was essentially over. Derek was in federal custody, Amanda was penniless and homeless, and Tommy was on a plane back to Poland. Vincent had signed over his remaining shares willingly, making Blake the sole owner of an empire worth $30 million. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Rivera. All targets neutralized. No signs of retaliation planned. How do you want to proceed? Blake typed back. Phase 2. Because Blake Morrison wasn't just interested in winning. He was interested in making sure his enemies stayed defeated. Chapter 8. Empire's New Order. 6 months after the war ended, Blake stood in the lobby of the newly renovated Morrison Hospitality Group headquarters. The Kozlov name had been erased from every restaurant, every document, every trace of the old order. In its place stood something bigger, stronger, and entirely under his control. Vincent approached him carrying 2 cups of coffee, his movements more careful now, but his eyes clearer than they'd been in years. At 71, the old man had found purpose again as Blake's operations consultant, earning his place through competence rather than birthright. The Chicago expansion is ahead of schedule, Vincent reported. 6 new locations opening next month, all fully staffed and profitable from day one. Blake nodded, reviewing the quarterly reports on his tablet. The numbers were staggering. Revenue had increased by 40% since he'd taken full control. Employee retention was at an all-time high. and their customer satisfaction scores had broken company records. Any word from Poland? Blake asked casually. Vincent's expression darkened. Tommy is working at cousin's bakery in Krakow, making minimum wage, living in studio apartment. He calls sometimes, begging for money. Vincent paused. I tell him to call you if he wants to apologize. Has he? No. Too proud to admit he was wrong. Blake's smile was cold. Good. Pride is expensive. Let him pay for it. The elevator opened and Patricia Montrose, Blake's lead attorney, emerged with a thick folder. Her expression was professionally neutral, but Blake caught the hint of satisfaction in her eyes. Derek Stone was sentenced this morning, she announced. 7 years federal prison, complete asset forfeiture, lifetime ban from the financial industry. And Amanda? Bankruptcy proceedings completed. She's working as a waitress at a diner in Cleveland, living in a studio apartment her sister found for her. She tried to contest the divorce settlement again last month. Blake raised an eyebrow. Same result. Judge dismissed with prejudice. Told her attorney to stop wasting the court's time. Patricia handed Blake the folder. There is one more thing. Amanda's been reaching out to industry journalists, trying to tell her side of the story. Claims you manipulated the situation, forced her into the affair with Derek, destroyed her life for sport. Blake flipped through the folder, examining newspaper clippings and blog posts. Amanda's narrative painted her as a victim of an abusive, controlling husband who'd stolen her family's business and left her with nothing. Any traction? Blake asked. None whatsoever. I had Marcus provide background information to the journalists who contacted us. Funny how their interest disappeared once they learned about Amanda's theft of trade secrets and Derek's fraud convictions. Vincent shook his head sadly. She still believes she is victim in this story. Blake set the folder aside. Let her believe what she wants. Reality doesn't care about her narrative. The truth was, Blake felt nothing when he thought about Amanda now. No anger, no satisfaction, no regret. She'd become irrelevant the moment she chose to betray him, and irrelevant people didn't deserve emotional investment. His phone buzzed with a call from Marcus Rivera. Blake, we might have a problem. What kind of problem? Tommy's back in the country. Flew into Detroit this morning under a false passport. My sources say he's been making calls to some of your former employees, trying to gather information about your current operations. Blake's expression didn't change, but Vincent noticed the subtle shift in his posture. Where is he now? Staying at a motel near the original restaurant. Looks like he's planning something, but I can't tell what yet. Full surveillance. I want to know every person he talks to, every call he makes, every move he makes. And Marcus? Make sure he knows he's being watched. Blake ended the call and turned to Patricia. What are our options if Tommy violates his deportation order? Immediate arrest, federal prosecution, minimum 5 years in prison. Plus, we can pursue criminal charges for the money he embezzled from the Phoenix location. And if he tries to interfere with our business operations? Patricia's smile was predatory. Then we destroy him so completely that Poland won't even take him back. That evening, Blake worked late in his office, reviewing expansion plans for the West Coast market. The building was empty except for security, the silence broken only by the hum of computers and the distant sound of traffic. His phone rang at 11 p.m. Unknown number. Blake Morrison. Hello, brother. Blake leaned back in his chair. Tommy, I hear you're back in town. I am here to reclaim what is rightfully mine. Blake's laughter was genuinely amused. Really? And what exactly do you think is rightfully yours? My family's business. My father's legacy. Everything you stole from us. I stole nothing, Tommy. I built everything you're trying to claim. But please, enlighten me. What's your plan? Are you going to sue me? Start a competing business? Or are you just here to make threats? Tommy's voice grew heated. I have been studying, Blake. Learning about American business law, about hostile takeovers, about corporate espionage. You think you are so smart, but I know your weaknesses now. Blake activated the recording app on his phone. Do tell. You care about your employees, about your reputation, about your precious empire. All of that can be destroyed if right pressure is applied in right places. And you think you're capable of applying that pressure? I think you underestimate what desperate man can accomplish. Blake stood and walked to his window, looking out at the city he'd conquered. Tommy, let me explain something to you. I didn't just defeat you, Amanda, and Derek. I obliterated you so completely that you became cautionary tales. Derek is in federal prison. Amanda is destitute and unemployable, You were exiled from the country like a medieval criminal. But I am back now. Yes, you are. Which means you've just committed a federal crime by violating your deportation order. Which means you have about 12 hours of freedom left before you spend the next decade in an American prison. Tommy's breathing became audible over the phone. You cannot prove I violated anything. Blake pulled up the surveillance photos Marcus had sent. I have pictures of you at Detroit Metro Airport, Tommy. I have copies of the false passport you used. I have recordings of this conversation. I have everything I need to destroy you permanently. The line was quiet for a long moment. Unless, Blake continued, you'd like to discuss terms for your surrender. What kind of terms? Blake smiled. Come to my office tomorrow at noon. Come alone. We'll discuss your options like civilized men. And if I refuse? Then at 12:01 p.m., I'll have you arrested, charged, and convicted of federal crimes that will keep you in American prisons until you're 60 years old. Your choice, Tommy. Blake ended the call and immediately dialed Marcus Rivera. Tommy just declared war, Blake said. Make sure he understands the price of that decision. As Blake gathered his things to leave, he felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with combat. Tommy had made the same mistake they all made, assuming that because Blake had shown mercy once, he would show it again. Tomorrow, Tommy would learn that Blake Morrison's mercy was reserved for those who earned it, and Tommy Kozlov had never earned anything in his life. Chapter 9, The Final Lesson. Tommy Kozlov arrived at Morrison Hospitality Group headquarters at exactly noon, his face a mask of defiant determination. Blake watched from his office window as Tommy exited a cab and walked toward the building with the swagger of a man who believed he still had cards to play. Blake had spent the morning reviewing Tommy's activities since his return. The surveillance reports made for interesting reading. Tommy had contacted 7 former Kozlov employees, offering them positions at a new restaurant venture he claimed to be financing. He'd also reached out to 3 food bloggers, promising exclusive information about Blake's illegal business practices. All of Tommy's contacts had immediately reported his approaches to Blake's security team. Vincent waited in the lobby when Tommy entered, his face a mixture of sadness and resignation. Father and son spoke in rapid Polish for several minutes, their voices growing increasingly heated until Vincent finally shook his head and walked away. Blake's assistant announced Tommy's arrival over the intercom. Send him up, Blake replied. Tommy entered Blake's office like he owned it, his eyes scanning the awards, photographs, and business achievements that lined the walls. Blake remained seated behind his desk, not bothering to acknowledge his visitor's presence. Impressive, Tommy said finally. You have built quite a monument to yourself. Blake looked up from his paperwork. Have a seat, Tommy. I prefer to stand. Then stand. It won't change what happens next. Tommy moved to the window, looking out at the city below. You know, Blake, I have been thinking about our conversation last night. About pressure and weaknesses. Have you? Yes. And I realize you were right about one thing. I did underestimate you before. But you have made same mistake about me. Blake set down his pen and gave Tommy his full attention. Enlighten me. Tommy turned from the window with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You assume I came back to America alone. You assume I am same stupid, desperate man who left here 6 months ago. Aren't you? Tommy pulled out his phone and showed Blake a photograph. Blake's mother, sitting in her assisted living facility in Dearborn, completely unaware that she was being photographed. Blake's expression didn't change, but Vincent, who had been listening from the outer office, stepped through the doorway with a sharp intake of breath. Tommy, Vincent said in Polish, what have you done? Tommy replied in English, his eyes never leaving Blake's face. I have learned to think like American businessman, Papa. Find the leverage, apply the pressure, get the results. Blake stood slowly, his movements controlled and deliberate. You're threatening my mother. I am offering you a choice. Sign over 50% ownership of the company to me, or your mother will have very unfortunate accident at her facility. Old people fall downstairs all the time. The office fell silent except for the distant hum of traffic. Vincent's face had gone white, his hands trembling as he realized what his son had become. Blake walked around his desk until he was standing directly in front of Tommy. Let me make sure I understand. You're threatening to murder a 78-year-old woman to steal a business you had no part in building. I am protecting my family's legacy. Blake's laugh was soft and terrifying. Your family's legacy? Tommy, you are your family's legacy. A worthless coward who threatens innocent people because he's too incompetent to earn anything honestly. Tommy's confident facade cracked slightly. You think I am bluffing? No, I think you're stupid enough to try it. Which is why I prepared for this possibility. Blake pressed a button on his desk phone. Patricia, please come in. Patricia Montrose entered carrying a tablet and looking grimly satisfied. Tommy Kozlov, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, extortion, and violation of federal deportation orders. You cannot arrest me. I am not threatening anyone. Patricia held up the tablet, showing a perfect recording of Tommy's threat. We have everything on digital video, Mr. Kozlov. Not just this conversation, but also your meeting with Boris Petrov yesterday, where you paid him $5,000 to handle the old woman if your negotiation failed. Tommy's face went white as he realized the depth of his mistake. Petrov is FBI informant? Petrov is a federal agent, yes. He's been tracking you since you landed in Detroit. Patricia smiled coldly. Did you really think we wouldn't anticipate your next move? The office door opened and two federal agents entered, their hands resting casually on their weapons. Tommy looked around the room, finally understanding that he was completely outmatched. You cannot do this, Tommy said weakly. Blake stepped closer until they were inches apart. I can do anything I want, Tommy. I own this city, I own this industry, and I own you. You came here thinking you could threaten my family, extort my business, and walk away victorious. Blake's voice dropped to a whisper. Instead, you're going to federal prison for the rest of your natural life. You'll die in a cage, forgotten and despised, while I continue building an empire that will outlast us both. As the agents handcuffed Tommy and read him his rights, Vincent approached Blake with tears in his eyes. I am sorry, Blake. I should have known he would come back for revenge. I should have warned you. Blake placed a hand on the old man's shoulder. You're not responsible for his choices, Vincent. Blood doesn't determine character. Actions do. Vincent nodded, watching as his son was led away in chains. What happens now? Blake returned to his desk and picked up the expansion plans he'd been reviewing. Now we get back to work. Tommy made his choice, just like Amanda made hers, just like Derek made his. They all chose to be my enemies instead of my allies. Blake looked out the window at the city below, his empire. And enemies get destroyed. It's the only language they understand. As the federal agents escorted Tommy from the building, Blake's phone buzzed with a message from Marcus Rivera, package delivered. Your mother is secure and has no idea anything happened. New security detail is in place permanently. Blake deleted the message and opened his laptop. The West Coast expansion wouldn't plan itself, and Morrison Hospitality Group had restaurants to build. 3 hours later, Vincent knocked on Blake's office door. The news is reporting Tommy's arrest. They are calling him failed extortionist and wannabe crime boss. Blake didn't look up from his work. Good. Let it serve as a warning to anyone else who thinks they can threaten what I've built. Vincent sat down across from Blake's desk. You know, when I first came to America, I thought success meant being feared. I thought it meant having power over other people. Blake saved his work and gave Vincent his attention. But you, Vincent continued, you taught me that real success means being irreplaceable. It means building something so valuable, so necessary, that people beg to be part of it instead of trying to destroy it. Blake nodded. Fear is temporary, Vincent. Respect is permanent. And loyalty. Blake smiled, the first genuine smile he'd shown in months. Loyalty is earned. And once earned, it's rewarded beyond measure. As the sun set over Detroit, Blake Morrison stood at the pinnacle of an empire he'd built with his own hands, defended with his own cunning, and secured with his own ruthlessness. Amanda was irrelevant, Derek was imprisoned, and Tommy would spend the rest of his life paying for his betrayal. The war was over. Blake had won completely. And tomorrow, he would begin building something even greater.